This is the Victor Davis Hanson podcast being recorded on Tuesday, February 9th in the year 2021. I'm Jack Fowler, the co-host. The namesake of our program, Victor Davis Hanson, is the Martin and Ely Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution. This podcast is being produced by the multi-talented Sarah Schutte. I don't want you to think that Sarah's just a producer. I'll put something up in the show notes, but she had a great piece on National Review's website the other day about that wonderful literary hero, Encyclopedia Brown. It was a tremendous piece. Sarah does great articles from time to time on literature. So anyway, that said, we've got a lot to talk about today. Today's program is being sponsored by the Bradley Foundation and its Liberty video series. On the agenda, we'll talk about Victor's new American Greatness article titled Our Animal Farm. There's a new documentary out about Thomas Sowell that Victor has a part in, but would like to hear his thoughts about the great author and great conservative, Gavin Newsom's impeachment. Gavin Newsom, maybe he should be impeached. Gavin Newsom's potential recall as governor, that effort is moving ahead. And then we do have, today's the day that the impeachment trial starts, and maybe Victor will share some thoughts on that. So Victor, let's talk first about California. Not to get it out of the way, but let's do that first. We have Newsom is now facing this recall petition drive that has collected 1.4 million signatures. 1.5 million verified need to be collected to trigger a recall. The goal of the organizers is 1.8. They have 80,000 volunteers out there collecting signatures. So this is moving ahead pretty forcefully. Backdrop to that is last week, the Institute of Government Studies at the University of California issued a poll, and Gavin Newsom is in increasingly difficult shape politically. The poll showed that of 10,000 registered voters, 48% disapproval rate now, 46% approval, 31% of those who do disapprove strongly. Interesting little nugget here is that back in September, 49% of the voters in California said Newsom was doing an excellent or good job in handling the pandemic overall. That number is now down to 31. So there's a pendulum swinging. So I'd like to get your comment on this, though, Victor, as a way to address this all. The Los Angeles Times published an editorial the other day titled, Gavin Newsom doesn't deserve to be recalled. And here's a snippet of it. He's made some poor personal and policy choices. His public communication has been unclear or confusing on occasion, and he's alienated political allies unnecessarily. He's changed course on the pandemic abruptly and sometimes mysteriously. The largest fraud of public money in state history happened under his watch. The governor will have to answer for all such missteps if he seeks re-election in 2022. But are these shortcomings ground to remove him from office in favor of an untested replacement who has no experience guiding the largest state in the nation as it tries to emerge from the largest health crisis in more than a century? Certainly not. That would be insanity. Victor Davis Hanson, is that insanity?
I guess you could answer that by saying you think that Arnold Schwarzenegger, as bad as he was better or worse than Gray Davis, whom we replaced in our last recall. I have a feeling that he did a better job than Gray Davis. But they have a point. You can't replace something with nothing. Mr. Cox has been very vocal, the mayor of San Diego, etc. But there's two backstories to that. One is California, and that is just a chronic problem that Gavin Newsom, the culture in which he partakes, or the water in which, as a swamp fish, he swims, is long-standing. And that means we have the highest bundle of gas, sales tax, income taxes in the nation. And by all transportation accounts, we have the worst freeways. 99 freeway I'm looking at out my window. I see a lot of things out my window, actually. is the most deadly freeway in the United States, if I could even use the word freeway. Airports are congested, the water projects are stagnant, the schools are rated anywhere from 45 to 48 in test scores in the nation. So my point, Jack, is that you pay a lot of money and you get a really bad deal in return. And the result is we've had about 5 to 8 million people leave the state the last 25 years, and they're leaving at an astronomical rate. That's long term. Short term, what caused his problems? And that you can break that down into hypocrisy. And I'll just give you 3 quick examples. He shut the schools down even when the data suggested that they were not centers of epidemics, but he put his kids in parochial school that stayed open. If he really believed that the schools posed a threat to the state, then he would have closed down the private schools or his own child's school. He leveled fines for violations of mask and social distancing. And then he went to probably the most expensive restaurant in California, the French Laundry in Napa area, and with friends, i.e. lobbyists, at a time of state concern about health policy. Here he is with healthcare lobbyists without a mask, very carefully boozing it up, having a wonderful, expensive meal. And then it's hard to ascertain the truth of this, but he apparently kept parts of his own winery open, the wine tasting. Maybe it was mail order, maybe not. People argue over it, while he closed others. So there was that part of hypocrisy. And then there's incoherence. Why is West Virginia outperforming California? They're a much more impoverished state. And why is Alaska outperforming California? I'm talking in terms of vaccination. And the answer is that we had this Byzantine social justice paradigm where we were going to let people 75 and over who die with the most frequency get it, but disadvantaged, you know the terminology, marginalized communities, people who are quote unquote essential workers. We have a whole rubric. So as someone who happened to be 65 and engaged in agriculture, I did get a shot, but when I showed up to get my vax, I think I was one of the oldest people there. And that when you have so many different distinctions, right, and you parcel it out not on the purposes of mass dissemination, then people don't get vaccinated. And we have the most cases of any state, not the most deaths, but the most cases in absolute numbers. And in terms of now people dying we're getting up there to Florida, Texas, and not quite New York and New Jersey. And so he hasn't done a good job on the virus. And then finally, the Hispanic factor can't be ruled out. There's about 42% of the state self-identifies as Latino. And I can tell you that I've maybe seen 50 booths out on the side of the road in Fresno or my hometown, Selma, with registration or ballot or petitions to remove Gavin Newsom, recall him. And I think 75% of them were non-white people there at the booth. Right. And why is that? Because they have small businesses, they have thin margin of safeties, and they've been really hurt by this lockdown of all, even though they feel that they're very susceptible to the virus. And so you add all of it up. And then finally, just very quickly, his personality is a very gravelly voice. He's a child of entitlement. He's close to the Gettys. He's in with the Pelosi circle. And he's identified fairly or not with the sort of intolerance of the left that we see every day. He's said things that were pretty ridiculous, like the crisis is a good chance to the lockdown. Never waste a crisis, basically, like Rahm Emanuel or Hillary had said, that this would result in a much more progressive capitalism. I thought to myself, well, what does he mean by progressive capitalism?
Right. What is that?
Does that mean that you pay your property tax on your 2 mansions overdue, so you have to be notified that you're now in default unless you pay? Does it mean that you get all of this money from family friends? Is that capitalism? I think what he meant was that the quarantine gives a unique opportunity to profit from crony capitalism. Therefore, that he's eating with people at the French Laundry, or he's getting money from family friends, or he's not paying his taxes on time.
Yeah. Victor, you mentioned before, rightly so, you can't defeat something with nothing. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger was a candidate who defeated Gray Davis in that recall. A name that's emerged formally is, and I'm going to mispronounce it, but it's Kevin Faulconer. He was the mayor of San Diego. He won in a special election, was reelected in 2016, couldn't run for reelection because of term limits. While he was mayor of San Diego, I hope I didn't say governor. Well, he was mayor of San Diego. He was the Republican of the largest city in America. So it seems like he has some viability. I have really no clue about him. Do you have any thoughts about him?
Just that San Diego is sort of a cosmopolitan city in state terms. It's on the border, has a large Latino, has a large presence. It has a large, huge military base, fleet, got a large military presence. It's a beautiful place. And so it's considered, of all the major cities in California, the most sane. That doesn't mean it's not crazy, but it means that by our standards, it works. And so there's fewer homeless people. There's less crime than, say, Los Angeles or Stockton or San Francisco. And usually, not always, it's possible for a moderate Republican like Pete Wilson was from San Diego mayor. So that's sort of the image that it has. But there's a big debate going on in California, and that is because the Prop 16 failed, the return of affirmative action or racial identity politics or discrimination, whatever term you want, and we opened up Uber and Lyft to contractors again without having to make them employees with a lot of overhead for the employers. That was seen as sort of weird for California. So there is a strain of thought that says, you know what? People don't want a squishy corrective to Gavin Newsom and Pelosi and Feinstein and the whole bankrupt Silicon Valley, open borders, California mess. They want a real conservative. And that has suggested if you had a very strong Hispanic candidate who was conservative and was astute politically, and there's a lot out there, I think they would do very well in California. And they could be much more conservative than the mayor of San Diego and get elected.
Victor Hanson. Well, let's talk about our great sponsor right now. Americans continue to navigate through multiple crises this year. We the People, a Bradley speaker series, offers insights and ideas on the current challenges we face from some of the remarkable organizations the Bradley Foundation supports. Visit bradleyfdn.org/liberty. And that's Bradley has an E in it. We'll spell it later. To watch Bradley's most recent episode, which features Mark Niehaus, president of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. Niehaus was a leader in the efforts to move the symphony to a new performance hall in an area of Milwaukee's downtown that desperately needed a boost. In this episode, which will be up today, he talks about the symphony's new home called the Bradley Symphony Center, that the challenges to restoring the building it's located in, and the future of the arts. That's Bradley, BRADLEY, FDN.org/liberty. Go there to watch the video. New episodes will be debuting every other week, so come back often and subscribe to the YouTube channel to be notified whenever a new one is posted. There are plentiful videos on the Bradley site also, not only this We the People series, Conceived in Liberty, a great series that was from last year, and also the Bradley Prize Winner video series. One last thing, Bradley is located in Milwaukee. As Victor knows, he's on the board. And one of the great things about Bradley is that it's not only a national philanthropy, but it's a local one. And that's a key to conservatism, is subsidiarity. So it does a very good job at taking care of the Milwaukee area and the surrounding area. So anyway, we thank the good folks at Bradley and the We the People series for sponsoring the Victor Davis Hanson podcast. Victor, let's talk briefly, or at length, however long you want, but about the impeachment trial, which, as we're recording right this moment, is just starting. I don't have it on my computer, but I just like to maybe back into this. You say what you want about this trial, but I'm interested in a little nugget here that two of the prosecutors, the House members, are from California, Ted Lieu and Eric Swalwell, the infamous Eric Swalwell, which is just remarkable that this guy with his baggage is seeking to prosecute the private citizen Donald Trump. Anyway, the impeachment trial is starting. Victor, do you have any thoughts on this that you'd like to share?
Yes. Now that I think of it, three. The first is that this insurrection and sedition, there's only one count of impeachment, that he incited a crowd that then marched over to the Capitol because of his incitement and tried to take over the country, or was guilty of sedition in addition to riot, and 5 people were killed. The problem with that is that the impeachment writ doesn't include the entire text of what he said. He said, go over there peacefully and patriotically, and you have to fight like hell or you don't have a country anymore. That was basically addressed at what he considered Liz Cheney or those types. This is before, of course, she voted to impeach him. But what I'm getting at is that if this was a legal matter, that would not even, some judge or we either would throw it out or the DA would never take that to trial. Then there's the matter that if you're going to indict people for that type of language, you got to fight like hell. I think Fox News has made an entire genre out of getting all the Democrats in the country who have said publicly to crowds, you got to fight like hell. And then worse, because we had Chuck Schumer, one of the principals of the Senate inquisitors, saying, you're going to reap the whirlwind. You're not going to know what hit you, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, with a mob at his back. And we've had Kamala Harris said these riots, and they were riots, you can call them demonstration, but they mostly ended in violence all summer long. They're going to continue. They should continue. She tried to help bail out people that were convicted of street violence. You go into Cory Booker, you get in their face in Obama fashion, as Obama called for. And we could go on and go on. So none of these, Maxine Waters now is desperate to show that when she said, get in there, get up to them and hound them and follow them, and I'm going to take Trump out tonight, that had nothing to do with the threat. Well, it sure was much more insurrectionary language than Trump. And then we know that the protests were already ongoing. So they were probably planned in advance of anything Trump said or did. So I don't think on the grounds that it's going, on those grounds of the actual case, it's going to work. And then secondly, I think the constitutional scholars are dividing up pretty much. Independents and conservative scholars say this is absurd, and far left ones say, oh, you can do it. But it comes down to the question of, we've never impeached a president twice. We've never impeached a president out of office as a private person. I think there's one case that's disputed, but clearly the founders did not mean impeachment would be directed at somebody while he was out of office. We have a criminal justice system. If people think Donald Trump did something wrong, then he should be indicted in Southern District of New York for inciting a riot. That's perfectly fine if they want to go do that. I don't think they will, because you'll be thrown out of court. But nevertheless, that's what you do. You don't impeach and put on trial a former president. And then you have, the Constitution says the chief justice shall preside over the proceedings. And either John Roberts thinks that it's a waste of time or it's unconstitutional, but whatever reason that he's privately guided by, he's not going to be there. So you're going to try to impeach a president who's not a president under the jurisdiction of the chief justice who's not there. So it's absurd. And then finally, and we've talked about this before, it's an ancient rule that you don't destroy institutions that protect people from political excess and mob violence, because you may, in extremis, need them. So what are we doing now? We have now established that a first-term president, as soon as he loses the House to the other party, will be impeached twice. And this is in addition to We're going to have a special counsel and give them 22 months to investigate collusion. And we're going to subject the president to impeachment while he's out of office. And the majority party now has the right to remove committee assignments of the minority party. Okay, fine. This is like Harry Reid's end of the filibuster. And what happened to that? So what happens if, I hope, and I think it will happen, the Republicans take the House in 2 years, 2022? I think the first thing a lot of them will want to do is start removing Representatives Omar, Tlaib, and AOC on the grounds that they're bigots. They've voiced strident and repulsive anti-Semitism, and they should not be in a position of authority, and get them off those committees. I think that we haven't seen the contents yet of the Hunter Biden. It's kind of strange that he hasn't severed all ties with China and his Chinese business connections. But if that should get out under a Republican Congress, we would probably have a special prosecutor. They probably want him to go investigate the big guy and his 10%, supposedly. I think, in addition, the first thing that the Republicans would say is to Joe Biden, if we find out that you and your family were getting money from Chinese companies connected to the Chinese communist country and you got 10%, we're going to appoint a special counsel to find out whether you paid taxes on it, whether that influenced your decision making, whether you ever met with anyone within, and there's no statute of limitations on this. And so that's where we are right now. And I have mixed feelings about it. I have an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, Jack. And the angel says, "Oh, Victor, come on. This is tit for tat." And as you go into the Hatfield-McCoys feuding in the halls of the U.S. Congress, you're going to destroy the institution, or you'll take it back to 1860 or something.
Right.
And then the little devil says, "Oh, wait a minute. This is not symmetrical. This is from the left. The Republicans did not end the Senate filibuster on judicial appointment. They did not ever strip people of the opposite party from committee assignment. They didn't appoint a special counsel. Maybe they did with Bill Clinton. That's a long time ago, and there were people who split on the Republican side. So the only way you get these people's attention, hard leftists, is that they have to understand there's consequences to their behavior, and you don't exceed. You use a favorite term that they like a lot to use. That's proportional. Proportional. So you act proportionally. For every fringe Republican that's removed from a candidate, every fringe Democrat's going to be removed. For every special counsel that gets 22 months and $40 million, there should be a Republican counsel. For every impeachment, two impeachments, and the Republicans are going to do 2 impeachments. And if Joe Biden goes out of office and he's culpable, then you impeach him out of office. And if you want to bring up the 25th Amendment nonstop ad nauseum, so much so that the president's reduced to taking the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test, then that's what Joe Biden's, and that's what the devil tells me.
All right, Victor. Well, we have a little more time left, so let's talk about shortly about Thomas Sowell, and then I'd like to end this episode with talking at some length about your new essay on titled "Our Animal Farm." But Thomas Sowell, I found out last night there's this new documentary from Bob Chittister and Jason Riley, and it's called Thomas Sowell: Common Sense in a Senseless World. It's up on YouTube. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. Already 3 million people have watched this, and it's essentially like, who is Thomas Sowell? And as I'm watching, I did email you last night, "Hey, Victor, maybe we should talk about this." And I was just started watching it, and there you are later on in the documentary. So, Victor, I think a lot of our listeners here would be interested in your take on Thomas Sowell, generally as a man, because you are not only a colleague, you are a friend. I would probably say my understanding is a pretty good friend. And someone who you've met with regularly. Tell us about Thomas Sowell, the man. What makes him so appealing?
Well, I'd say I've been at the Hoover Institution 18 years, and the 2 closest friends that I've had ideologically were Shelby Steele and Tom Sowell. And then I was sort of in awe of him when I got there. And then quietly, he's kind of a recluse, and he would use that term himself in the sense that he's been subject to a lot of abuse from the left. So he's very suspicious of people, and he has a grounds to be suspicious of their motives. And he's been called a lot of unfair things. So he asked me about in 2004 to have lunch with him, and that became a ritual until about 2 years ago, when he's now 90.
Right.
But we would have lunch twice a month and talk about things. And so he would give me his latest book, and I would give him mine, and I read, and so he was essentially a student, kind of a Milton Friedman, a free market libertarian economist. And that was a change from his earlier flirtations with radicalism. He became conservative. He was at UCLA, and then Glenn Campbell hired him, gave him a platform, and then he became not just an economist, but he used that background in economics, empiricism, to write books on culture, race, politics, sociology, almost every contemporary problem there is, from the police to poverty to welfare to the Great Society to identity politics, and always from the conservative or contrarian point of view. And the result was and then he wrote 3 times a week a column for over 20 years. So he was a man of all seasons. And during this time, when at an age, so I met him when he was 70, 68, 69. He's now 90. He didn't drop off any productivity. He turned out a book every 2 years. Very good. They sold extremely well. And then he was an amateur, or I shouldn't say amateur, he was an accomplished photographer as well. But I learned a lot from his world take. What I liked is once in a while we would say, well, let's have a third party join us for lunch. And they were generals, they were noted people, they were friends of his or friends of mine, whomever. And I remember one guy was very, very provocative. And he just tried to bait Tom in the sense of, well, we all know that the Great Society worked. Tom would just say, oh, we all know it failed. And then he'd say, and we realize that Bill Clinton saved us from the Bushes and Reagans. And then Tom would say, we all realize that Bill Clinton almost ruined the country. And so, but that's the way, and he would be very terse. And then finally, he'd say things like, are you done, Yao? And then he'd look at me and say, Victor and I want to eat, and then leave as quickly as possible. So,
oh my God.
Yeah. So, but he never did it in a rude fashion. He was, but what I liked about him was, he was completely transparent. He was blunt. He was honest. And he got to the point, I think, he didn't care what people said about him. Not that he didn't, he liked it, but he just thought, you know what? There's a certain psychological disorder called hard leftism, and you're never going to change it. It's not empirical. It's not rational, but it's emotional. And they're going to hate you for endangering or, refuting or exposing the hypocrisies or the inconsistencies of their worldview. So it's been one of the great things of my life, the last 20 years, to have known him. We still have dinner every spring and Christmas, Shelby and Tom and I and our wives. So that's been a great thing. And
it's a great documentary. It's about an hour, very watchable, goes very quickly. And just one observation I had about it, and then we can move on to the next topic, was he did say that one of the most important things to happen to him in his life was to be introduced to books at a very young age. He was almost like, but if you're 15 and you're not embracing reading, it's too late. He was a friend when he moved to New York City when he was 8 years old. A friend brought him to the public library, and he was overwhelmed by everything there, the volume of books. But to him, it was reading was very important from a very young age, and that's what he credits with his success.
That's a very good point, because I don't think I've ever met anybody that read as much as he did. And so the conversations would go something like, hey, Tom, which of the candidates in the 2012 or 16 primary appeals to you? And he would reference them in terms of books he's read or ideas he had. But if you ask him, do you think in 2012 Mitt Romney has a certain percentage and why, he wasn't interested, because he said, this is just fluff of the day. But he wanted to know, he knew the biography of Mitt Romney, and he
Right.
knew his ideas. And, he would say out of the blue, I remember when Romney got the nomination, he said, it's very disturbing, Victor, that a person with ostensible high character would have introduced a precursor to Obamacare and then not be candid about why he did it, and not really refute it. So
Right.
it was, the conversation in politics was all based on prior reading, philosophy, doctrine, character, and that sort.
Well, Victor, let's talk about your new essay in American Greatness, and it is based on a book. Speaking of books, Animal Farm. That's your starting point for this piece. You give it's a very long piece, but another gem. Two basic parts. You give a retrospective of the last 60 years of the left's activity, and then where it has brought us now. Let me just get you to. Here's a brief snippet of it. You talk about the characters in Orwell's novel, and that they remind us that leftist totalitarianism inevitably becomes far worse than the supposed parasitical capitalists they once toppled. Orwell saw that the desire for power stamps out all ideological pretenses. It creates an untouchable ruling clique central to all totalitarian movements. Beware, he warns, of the powerful who claim to help the helpless. So something so far less violent, but no less bizarre and disturbing, now characterizes the American new left. It is completing its final Animal Farm metamorphosis as it finishes its long march through our cultural, economic, and social institutions. Leftists may talk of revolutionary transformation, but their agenda is to help friends, punish enemies, and to keep and expand power. So, Victor, you talk about many things of their march through these institutions over the last 5, 6, 7 decades. One of those things is how the left has treated free speech. Would you talk about that, and anything else you want to talk about?
Well, they don't believe in free speech, and they have a new term that shows that when they're pressed on questions of shouting down speakers at campuses or deplatforming people who express their views on social media, or trying to, I think it was Max Boot we've talked about earlier, advocating that Fox be dropped from its subscribers on cable TV. They have a new term they've used, and it goes something, it's not about speech, it's about reach. Right. We don't mind that you can say whatever you want, but we just don't want you to say it on our venue. And that's so ironic. And that was what I was trying to point out in the piece, that they become what they used to despise. Because here in California, I remember my parents, as good Democrats, raised, they didn't have any money, but they took us to the Democratic Central Committee. I remember I'd sit there listening to all of these people rail about this open housing proposition that wanted to reverse the Supreme Court decision. I think it was 1964, but I have to check, in which the landlord could pick and choose, or the lunch counter owner could pick and choose who came there. And that was the same argument. I don't really want you, because you're black, coming into my apartment and renting, but I'm not going to deny you the right to rent. You just go somewhere else, when there was nowhere else in that small town to go to. Right. And so what they're saying is, I don't really care that you tweet or you post whatever you want, but just don't do it on the platforms that control 90% of the market. Go over there to Parler. Oh, by the way, we just destroyed Parler, so you have no way to express yourself. That's the argument they're using. They don't believe in free speech, because they have a term either that they use, it's all free speech they disagree with is hate speech. And so they try to demonize it. The point of that whole article, though, was to suggest that at certain times, the French Revolution, the Spanish Inquisition, the Salem witch trials, the McCarthy period, elements of the last stages of Me Too, societies lose their mind and they go into hysterical fashion. Thucydides described it in the best way I know of the revolution at Corcyra in the third book of his history, where there becomes a game or contest to outdo the next person, to counsel more for less cause than the next person. And then this spirals until finally it becomes absurd. So you have the Jacobins, making statues to the god of pure reason and trying to rename the calendar with new names to get rid of the old regime, any notion, or going out in the countryside and destroying churches or killing nuns. Or during the McCarthy period saying, have you ever been a communist? So if some guy was 22 years old in the Depression and like an idiot joined the American Communist Party, then if he's a screenwriter when he's, 55 and he's not a communist, then he can never write again in Hollywood under his own name. And so that's where we are right now. We're in a mass state of hysteria and we're destroying lives, we're destroying careers. But what we're also not talking about, I think this is really important, there's an economic cost to this. We are spending literally billions of dollars and billions of man and women hours of labor to set up indoctrination. We call that, workshops, diversity workshops, white privilege workshops, unearned privilege white workshops. We're scanning our own lives and the lives of other people to see if we can find one thing in their past by which we can take advantage of it, often and usually for career purposes. We're banning textbooks and printing new orthodox. In other words, we have commissars now in our society that are very unproductive and very expensive, and they're hampering free expression. And we know from history that one of the reasons that the Muslim world, after the conquest of Constantinople in 1453, it began to stagnate. And because it controlled such territory, the madrasa, or the radical Islamists, said to people, if you're going to build that lighthouse and it works better than a European lighthouse, then it challenges the power and sanctity of Allah. So stop it.
Right.
Or medical research. Or we know during the Inquisition that if you were a brilliant Jewish scholar, were copying manuscripts about Jewish medicine that had great importance for Western Civ, then you were ostracized and packed off to Crete to save your life. We know that physics was a disproportionate number of brilliant German Jews had created, for the most part, German physics, and they were driven out. And that was one reason why Hitler didn't get the bomb. So, and as a scholar, I can tell you that when I wrote a lot of books on early agrarianism, land tenure, the use of how the size of average farms, say in the 5th century BC, any research that I found in journals like Irene from Czechoslovakia or in German from certain Eastern European countries, or the Soviet translations from VDI, I think it was called, you couldn't trust, because inevitably somebody would say, of course, according to Marx or according to Soviet, and it was polluted. By the same token, when I wrote books about military history and I started to investigate Sparta and its treatment of the Messenians, there were a lot of articles written between 1932 and 1939 in Germany about the Messenian problem, or the idea of slavery and how great the Spartans were because they had a slave state and they made what they called, even though I don't think they were quite racial categorizations as humans, half humans, subhumans, etc. My point I'm getting at, it was completely worthless. It nullified everything because you couldn't trust the author. And I have a feeling that 50 years from now, the PhD theses that are now being written, the political commentary, the books are going to be considered, they're going to be kind of like 60s trash. I mean, popular fear of flying type novel. I mean, race, class, gender, but not even class anymore. Race and gender is determining how we hire, how we fire, who gets an ad, who gets a contract, who gets canceled, who gets promoted. And people are going to get, it's not empirical. The United States is the richest, the most secure, and the freest country in the world because of individual creativity and choice. And when you put political operatives to monitor what people say, you create a climate of fear. So if you're doing a paper on cancer research or epidemiology, all of a sudden you're saying, you know what? I'm kind of afraid that it might suggest that one particular group is more inclined to watch diet, or one other group is smoking more, or one other group has problems with obesity. But if I publish that, I'm going to be considered a racist.
Yeah.
And even in California, if you want to know why we're so tardy in getting vaccinations out, it's because the governor and the political commissars around him tried to dream up a Byzantine, intricately layered proportion of this particular racial group, this particular economic group, rather than just open it up and say, we're going to do it by age, get to it Walmart, get to it CVS.
Right. There are not enough transsexuals getting the vaccine yet. Yeah, these are the criteria. Well, Victor, let me just play off part of what you said before and conclude this with a question or a request for your thoughts from a listener, Cullen Coates, and he wrote. So you talked about hysteria, and maybe this could call this. Is it contrived and calculated hysteria? So here's what he wrote, hoping for your opinion. What strikes me is that for decades now, the progressives have demonstrated a remarkable ability to develop long-term plans and enable them in lockstep. George Soros has spent hundreds of millions for the last 30 plus years funding a large number of NGOs. I think he meant also not-for-profits, to implement planned and well-coordinated change. Bill Ayers and his colleagues started in the early 70s a successful campaign to change the education system. And he goes on. You're in your Animal Farm piece. I don't think there's any real difference here, but you give a great retrospective on so many ways in which the left influenced various institutions. But it does seem to me to be calculated, and we do know that right now the left is a very calculated and organized monolith. I remember Cleta Mitchell, our friend, did a great paper on this. So anyway, this is what Cullen Coates is hoping for your opinion on. Do we conservatives need to steal a page from the left and have a multi-decade perspective on taking back these institutions?
Yeah, I think so. We can be transparent about it. Remember, the left just published in Time magazine something called The Secret History, the shadow effort to really collude with all levers of influence in society to deny Donald Trump re-election. It was kind of I don't know why they wrote it and they published it in Time, because it was a confession that they're all biased, and they act like they're not biased, and they secretly talk to each other, and they use corporate money and social media and entertainment and politics and the media all to affect in coordination and in concert a political result. And they're arrogant about it, and they want to get credit for it. So that's what you're up against. And I think what people need to do in the next 2 years, first of all, politically, they have to win the House. That's just a practical necessity. If you don't win the House, we're going to get 4 years of this, and it's going to be geometrically accelerating, and it already is. And it's going to be very scary. Remember that when the French President Macron, a man of the left, even though he might be considered conservative in France, but he's a man of the left.
Right.
When he says that wokeness in America creates dangers for the West, then he's worried. And when China is delighted that they have somebody in the White House who agrees that, questioning Chinese truth about the Wuhan lab or the WHO's certain proclamations, that's racist and xenophobic. They're delighted. So when our allies are worried about us and our enemies are delighted, it tells me that the wokeness, we're at peak wokeness, and we've got to stop it. We've got to win the House. We've got to find a way to, we're a minority party. The Republicans are a minority party. They have to find a way to get this MAGA agenda at its peak in late 2019 was almost perfected. The economy was booming. unemployment was down, energy development was way up. We were addressing social things in the Department of Education and under Ben Carson, and it was really starting to work. And there were polls that showed that maybe as many as 20% of blacks and maybe 40 to 45%, even Trump got record levels, but he would have got much higher without the demonization of the COVID year.
Right.
So that MAGA agenda has to be institutionalized. And then they're going to have to come to grips with Donald Trump. So we have about 9 names out there of obvious candidates for 2024, but all of them are not going to be nominated if they get on the wrong side of Donald Trump. So if he comes out and says Nikki Haley is, she's a rhino,
right?
I don't know. She's not going to, even if she got the nomination, she wouldn't win.
Yeah.
Because we learned that with Mitt Romney and John McCain. So they're going to have to find a way to include Donald Trump's influence, and then the unknown is whether he wants to run again. And if he were to run again, then people are going to have to say to him, "You could have won the 2020 election with the landslide that you talk about to such a degree that even the mail-in voting wouldn't have been enough for them, and all of the colluding that they openly admit to in Time magazine wouldn't have been enough had you not alienated some of the swing voters with tweets and that has to be an honest discussion of people who feel Trump did a good job. But if they split the party, and it's going to be, I think they have a good opportunity because the left is veering so hard left, and the popular culture is becoming Soviet-like, and Joe Biden is obviously not going to be an effective president, that there's a natural constituency. Everybody says this can't go on like it is.
Right.
You can't get rid of the fossil fuel industry. You can't open the borders in time of COVID to illegal immigration. You can't just say that one day federal immigration law doesn't exist. You can't go out and reward the Iranians for their terrorism and get back in this crazy Iran deal. You can't go reset and appease the Chinese. We know how that happened before. So I think people are going to understand that they want to unite. And I think the Never Trumpers are done with, because without Donald Trump, they're nothing. They're a confused bunch that are saying, I don't really know whether I'm a conservative or I'm a liberal. The liberals have paved my way. The liberals praise me, but if I keep doing it, then I have to refute my entire life. But maybe I can keep,
Yeah. Is there a career in this?
Yeah. Is Donald Trump's presidential corpse enough to keep kicking and beating and dissecting and cutting and burning? How long can I keep doing that? Yeah. Do I have any purpose other than that? And really, is this very intellectually honest that on January 19th, I tell the whole world that Donald Trump is an existential enemy of the United States? And then on January 30th, I say, no, actually, it was Joe Biden, when Donald Trump was the only chemotherapy that could stop the cancer of Joe Biden, if that's what they believe. So why we should believe any of them when they tell us that the first mission is to get rid of Donald Trump? That's more important than anything. And then the next day they say the most important thing is to stop this socialist agenda. Well, you had a mechanism. It was sort of messy, but it was a mechanism. So they're through, I think, intellectually and ethically.
Well, let's, Victor, we've run out of time, but between now and hopefully our next episode next week, it will Abraham Lincoln's birthday will have taken place, and maybe we should talk about the practicality of politics seen through Lincoln, who dealt with such a crisis and his virtue was prudence. And today we have many on the right whose virtue, if you want to call it a virtue, is sanctimony. And sanctimony doesn't win you elections at the end of the day, I don't think. But let's talk about Lincoln next week, if you don't mind. But that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. I'd like to thank, of course, the Bradley Foundation for sponsoring this episode. Please go to Bradley with an E, FDN.org/liberty to catch the We the People series. Sarah, thank you for your producing. And folks, do subscribe to the Victor Davis Hanson podcast on some of the other platforms, Google Play, Stitcher, iTunes. Please leave a nice review for Victor on the iTunes platform. So thanks very much. And we hope to be back next week for another episode of the Victor Davis Hanson podcast. Thank you.